Welcome to the next session of our International SEO Masterclass. Today, we have been joined with a very special guest, Miriam, who's going to be talking to you about Canada. So, Miriam, would you like to introduce yourself and go and tell everybody who you are?
Well, bonjour, hi, my name is Myriam Gessier, and I'm an SEO that operates in Canada, but not just any part of Canada, the French part of Canada. That's a different world. So I'm hoping that I can tell you a few things about the country itself and then the nation of Quebec and how two languages cohabit in this great land. So when we talk about international SEO, many people often think, okay, so this is going to be in multiple countries. But what happens when you are part of a country that has two different official languages that are not necessarily spoken with the same degree, depending on where you are, and is a land of immigration where there are some, you know, great flows of folks that are coming from the Anglophone world, mainly the Commonwealth, and some Francophones coming in. Ooh, that's a great mix. So when I talk about international SEO within Canada, you understand why things can get very complicated. And here's the thing, before you enter Canada from a marketing standpoint, nobody tells you this. You have to figure it out as you go, and sometimes some decisions, you wish you were informed. This is why we're here today.
I know. I think most of our clients kind of assume, oh, let's just go on with our American strategy because, it's just a little bit above America. They speak English. That will do absolutely fine. But I'm hoping that you'll be able to show that's not quite the case.
There are many, many brands that have failed spectacularly in Canada, many brands that have failed spectacularly, specifically in French Canada, thinking it would be easy. And we also have some France marketing departments who are trying to make it in Quebec and think it's the same game. It's not. So let's look at why. Today we're going to do a small intro, talk about, some language characteristics, different provinces, because we have different rules, how the culture impacts certain search behaviors, and why translating doesn't always work, because we can tell. And some technical SEO fails too, because, these are painfully, painfully obvious when you are in Canada. And customers, clients, humans in general living there are out of patience. We're not as forgiving as marketing departments think because we faced many of these technical hurdles.
I'm really curious what you're going to show now.
Well, I have an opinion. Okay, I have to tell you something. I have to tell everyone something. What we say about Canadian geese is real. These birds are the psychopath of the animal kingdom. You do not get close to them. You do not look at them. If you see a Canadian goose on your way, you move along. You do not face it. You run the opposite direction. This is probably the scariest part of Canada. Everybody thinks it's like the wayward moose or, maybe bears. No, it's the geese. I bet you didn't know that, right?
I did not know. I would have said the cold, actually. It gets like -10 here, but -40. I cannot cope with that.
This brings me on a little tangent, but I think everyone will enjoy it. The cold is a part of our lives. So sometimes some marketing arguments really matter to us, and some marketing arguments that are normally important for some folks are not to us. If you tell me, for example, that something is Canadian winterproof, oh, I care because most things cannot handle -40 degrees Celsius. So this is something important. If you're telling me my brand new blender can make snow in a few seconds, this is a genuine thing. I saw this when I was looking for a blender. I will look puzzled onto the product description and go, why? I can have snow outside 6 or 7 months of the year. Why are you telling me I can make snow at home? I don't need that. So you have to keep this in mind. Like certain things just don't sound the same when you're faced with this type of winter. And many people tend to forget that Canada is a country with two official languages, English and French. And when we say English, we mean Canadian English. It's different.
Ooh.
Yes, do you know what a loony is? No, huh?
I think I do, but it's not very politically correct, so it's probably something very different.
Absolutely. It's our local currency. We have a loonie and we have a toonie. So what like the $1 coin and the $2 coin.
Oh
Yes.
my gosh, I never ever would have done that or got that.
So you see why I say that Canadian English, it hits a little bit different. So we'll
Oh
look
yeah,
into that.
I can relate. I know, for example, when my husband says hot press to anybody in England, they're like, "What are you on about?" He's like, "Oh, it's an airing cupboard."
Oh yes. Oh no, I would see this is why it matters to spend a little time and figure things out before you launch your big strategy. Something you should know about Quebec specifically, we are masters of bonjour, hi. Any person that you meet in a retail capacity automatically greets you this way. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure. And if you choose to reply in English, they will adapt. If you choose to speak in French, they will adapt. On paper, obviously. Not everyone speaks English as well in Quebec, but you always start your retail experience with a bonjour, hi, and you have to pick. It can be a bit disorienting, and on the web, we're not really allowed to do that. We bots don't like it when web pages are in two languages. Most humans don't either. However, it is something that happens quite often in Canada. And if you are a marketing manager looking to adapt your content, please do not go this route. It is not something that works quite well as it works in real life. So that
I,
makes it an interesting case.
yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. And with SEO, don't put your two languages on the page together. Not a good idea.
No, and you would think as, a marketing professional, we know these things. I see them happen in the wild weekly. Okay. So, first piece of advice from both of us, please don't do that.
One language, one website. There you go.
And you know about the Commonwealth, but not everybody knows that, we actually do welcome quite a bit of folks that want to enjoy our winter and maybe a new life in our lands with Canadian geese. So we do end up with quite an interesting mix of English as well. Why should you care? Well, depending on where you decide to start your marketing efforts, you may need to be weary of that. Some words may mean something else to specific audiences you're looking to reach. So it's not because you are in Canada that some of your previous habits with your native tongue or whatever it may be do not leave you. So, for example, as a French Canadian, I have the passport, it's amazing, but I'm originally from France. I will have a tendency to tell people, oh, I'll send you an email. But in French, we would just use the word email, the English word. In Quebec, we have a French equivalent, which is courriel, electronic mail, email, basically, but in French. And this is how you can spot the little differences over time. However, nobody bothers to tell you these differences. And if you have to do an advertising campaign, let's say via Google Ads, it pays off to know these little differences because you can speak to specific audiences that are localized in specific neighborhoods or cities and address them in the way they are used to or have a tendency to default to and get more conversions because you are literally speaking their language. So, this can be quite an edge that most bigger companies in place will not take the time to investigate. So, you can have great success with this.
I think it's also important as well. Like, I speak French. I learned French in France. I remember interviewing somebody in Canada a couple of years ago, and she said a word that was actually quite rude in France. So I started giggling. She started looking at me like, why are you giggling? I'm just saying a normal thing. So you have to be really wary as well of the language differences, because you could try and say something that actually it means something pretty rude instead.
My first job in Quebec, the recruiter had left a note on my file, and I got to see my file a few weeks in. And he said that I was an absolutely lit up candidate. But it was said in a way that in French from France, it meant that I was unhinged and mentally unstable. And in Quebec, it meant that I was on it, that I was bright, and that I was aware of all things tied to SEO.
That's quite a difference, I would say. Like saying that somebody's, unhinged or really, really good for the job.
This is what I mean when I say you can really, really make sure that your ads speak to the right person. Personalization can go a long way in those cases. Concretely, what does it look like? Because I know that most people don't talk about this. So let's just open the curtain a bit and show you. You will have Quebecers. So Quebecers don't necessarily enjoy being referred to as French Canadians. They really identify as Quebecers. So if you are going to do marketing, any type of marketing effort, really, you have to keep these differences in mind, because if you are trying to bring Quebecers into the Canadian fold, there could be some resistance if you're addressing them this way. But on the other side, because we have Anglophones who are Quebecers as well. And if you want to address them in French from France, it's not going to work either. You cannot say that they are French. They do not identify as French. Quebec has its own culture, is recognized as its own nation within Canada. So this is something that anyone should keep in mind. But on top of this, you have folks like me. So you have people that are French originally living in Quebec. And while we operate in the community, we are integrated, we are often referred to as maudit français, which, if you have some French knowledge, I can let you translate as politely as you can, or I can leave it for folks to Google this charming expression.
I am not very good at translating things politely, so let's leave it to the imagination.
Absolutely. It's one of those endearingly rude statements that we will leave here. You, you also have Anglo-Canadians, but each have their own habits. Because, once again, if you go to Alberta or Ontario, oh, it's not the same vibe. It's not necessarily the same reality. You have to keep this in mind. But you also have folks from the UK, India, and many other Commonwealth countries. I haven't seen many Australians come to Canada, but maybe it's because I'm in the wrong part. However, I do want to hear from them if they are there. How did your first 3 winters go? I have many questions for you.
Oh, there's so many Irish there as well, because like a load of mine and my husband's friends now live in Canada. It's kind of the done
Yes,
thing.
yes, and it's something that nobody really discusses, but when you arrive as a new immigrant, who speaks to you and how? If you want to open a bank account, what are you going to be Googling? What do you need? We don't necessarily use the same words because the banking system is also different. So some accounts have wildly different names. And if you are a new immigrant in Canada, maybe you don't speak English that well, or maybe you don't speak French that well yet. So this is also something to consider when we talk about adapting your marketing efforts. You need to make sure that the language is easily parsable for folks that do not have a proficient understanding of anything that you are trying to tell them. So readability is a big must as well, because for example, you have very large Chinese communities in some parts of Canada, to the extent that I will sometimes get asked to provide some tips for Baidu SEO. It's that level. Or some Canadian websites will invest in having a simplified version in whatever language their target audience is in from China. So we have to keep this in mind as well. That doesn't mean that every marketing manager will have to do it, but keep it in mind because others are.
That's really, really interesting. And I think as well, something that I've noticed or from speaking to friends is actually like cultural differences as well. I remember a friend told us a story that he just moved to Canada. He was crossing the road. I don't know, he got snow on him or something, and used a word that in Ireland is quite common. It wouldn't be classed as rude. To express his displeasure at the situation. And people at the traffic lights actually gasped at him.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I'm I'm going to add a layer to this. It's very interesting from the French side as well. I used to work in a development center, and somebody told me some really bad news about something, and the news were so bad, and I had to warn them not to do this. That when I heard it, all I could think is, well, I'm finding myself a new job. However, you have to keep in mind French people are very oftentimes seen as always angry. There's a big stereotype in Quebec. Like, we're always angry, we're always complaining, we're always about to strike. And it's all in good fun most of the time. And this time I just replied with a word in French saying, very well, then. And the person didn't understand my sarcasm and went, oh, you took this much better than I thought you would. And I was thinking to myself, you do not understand that this polite phrasing in French is when you are passive aggressively signing an email saying, like cordially, which means something very different when you're angry. Like if you have someone that is always signing an email saying, hey, talk to you later, talk to you soon, and all of a sudden it's sincerely or cordially, and you're in hot water. This was the effect, but lost in translation within the same
Yeah.
language. So concretely, what is the reality in Canada? Is everyone bilingual? Yeah, kind of like I am bilingual. Well, not bilingual, but Duolingo told me I'm 30% fluent in German. Let me tell you, maybe in Duolingo land, not in real life. So we're not all bilingual. Some francophones will speak English. I am a prime example of this, but you will also have some Anglophones that speak French. Just do not assume that it's always the case. If you are going to rely on this assumption to market things in Canada, you are in for a rude awakening. And according to Statistics Canada, 20% or more thereabout of all citizens use both languages. So this means that English alone is often not enough in some parts. Because if you're assuming everybody speaks English, you're wrong.
That's something that I've heard as well. The most common thing is, oh, everybody in Canada speaks English. It's enough. And then when you start kind of diving into culture, especially in Quebec and everywhere, you realize that actually people don't speak English. It's not a case of, they learn English at school, it's a second language, it's a language of Canada. Nope, they are proper French speakers.
I'm very focused on showcasing what Quebec is like because this is my reality. And very often, most marketing managers are interested in Quebec when they think about French Canada. Are we alone? No. In New Brunswick, we also have French speakers. We also have historically Acadians that are very much so anchored into the French language. So we have to keep this in mind. And very oftentimes, whenever you will start marketing efforts for Canada, there's always and then there's Quebec moment of the planning portion. Here's why. It's a very, very different world. It has very different laws. And the rules, well, not everyone takes the time to explain them to marketing managers. So the law in Quebec is clear. All businesses must be able to serve the public in French, but they can normally serve a non-French speaking customer in that person's language. However, if you serve a public other than consumers, it must be done in French, meaning that if you are, let's say, B2B, you need to operate mainly in French. And that is something that is not necessarily discussed. And it's not something that is going to change anytime soon. We had a bit of a chat, you and I, about things are changing in Quebec. The law is evolving and it's strengthening this decision. Quebec is doubling down and using some, let's just say, legal loopholes to adopt certain legal decisions that get turned into laws that really do want to put French first. What will be the impact on business in the years to come? That remains to be seen. But if you want to stay on the safe side, you should always keep in mind French should be front loaded first in any business that tries to come into Quebec.
I think that's so important for people to know because, as I said, most people assume you can go with English, but no, you have to do it in French as well, especially if you are targeting Quebec.
And I have a prime example of some businesses that choose to really treat Quebec like an afterthought. So if you have an e-commerce website tied to, physical stores, and it's not translated in French, you are not allowed to show it if you operate in Quebec. So what websites, what some brands will decide is to filter out their Quebec traffic and tell you, we cannot show you our website. So imagine you want to know when the store is open, but you can't go on their website to know when it's open.
Oh my gosh, that must be so frustrating. And like, I sometimes go online as well to kind of take a look at the clothes that I want are in the shops, or if I can reserve it and go and pick it up in store. I would be so frustrated if like it wasn't available to me just because I spoke French.
Yes, this is part of our reality. Not always, but there are some glaring cases where yes, this is happening. And we as customers hate having to use a VPN to see your content because that is what many of us resort to. We will just say we're in Toronto and hope we can see the website.
Are you serious? That's
Yes.
wow.
And it's something that we not everyone, but many folks will resort to if they know how it works. And VPNs are getting more and more popular. This is one of those use cases. So this brings me in to something else, a little nugget. If your traffic in like your analytics tool, Google Analytics or whatever else is showing that most of your traffic is coming, for example, from the USA or from strange places, always keep in mind two things. Well, three. Immigration is a reality for us. The second one is VPNs are a reality for us. And the third one is sometimes some internet service providers are identified as coming from the US for technical reasons, but we are right at home in Canada. It's just something that happens. So data is also a bit tricky. This brings me to something else. I'm not necessarily a social media analytics type of person, but having worked with many platforms with clients over the years, the recommendations for Canada are sometimes dire. It feels like they're just slapping on some US data and they're like, go for it. And we're like, you don't understand this quite well.
Yeah. Beginning to think that Canadian marketing is very misunderstood.
This is the best way to explain it. Yes, this is how, if you have to keep something in mind from this presentation, what you just said. How do you get started building an online brand in Canada then? Because this has many challenges. Let's look at it. What does it concretely look like when we say build a brand? Well, when a regional version with a location specific page is required, you need an international SEO and UX strategy to ensure the best experience for visitors. And this is something that is very often forgotten because you will have the French office or French headquarters telling you, we can just use the French content. Or, they will allow you to build out a French Canadian version of the website, but they will not support you in any way. So you will end up having competition from the French website in your results. This is not pleasant. So you really need to align your strategies. Same goes for US centric companies. So this is a very important statement. You need an international SEO and UX strategy to make sure that nobody ends up being disappointed when visiting your website. Another key element tied to this, the one heartbreaking decision any marketing manager has to make is, so we have a brand new Canadian website. What is the main language of that website? If somebody comes in without any cookies, without anything happening, do not know us, what is the first language that gets served? Is it French or is it English? And this has internal politics written all over it. I've worked with huge brands that are Quebec born. So they really do make it a point to have the French version be the first thing people see, but most of their market is actually in English speaking Canada. So while this is filling out the founder's mission, personal mission, it's hurting sales. Imagine if you want to add complication to this. Well, some products are not necessarily available, let's say, in Saskatchewan, and they are in Quebec. You also need to manage this on your website because visitor expectations are going to be impacted.
That sounds complicated. Very complicated.
Absolutely. It does bring about a few headaches. And I'm not saying that it will be everyone's case. I'm just saying these are recurring nightmares that we face.
I think, yeah, get an international SEO person who understands Canada. I think this is as well another nugget that's coming out of this presentation.
Yes, absolutely. Your best asset would be to have someone on the ground locally to at least get you kickstarted. And we have quite a few branding firms, for example, that specialize in easing some of these burdens. I was very impressed to see that because you would think that it's only um, technical folks that will care about this, or performance marketing folks, but no, even branding companies are like, listen, we are an agency, we understand your problem. You may think that your brand is going to thrive here. No, we have to tell you a few things. Don't be like Target. Target is the big US brand that everyone talks about when they talk about Canadian failure.
Do you have any examples? I'm curious now.
Yes, so Target had a rabid following from Canadians. They would cross the border just to go to Target. Imagine if somebody told you, I get up in the morning and I plan a trip to a different country just so I can go to the grocery store. Well, not the grocery store, but like a big box store.
Yeah.
You would go, but why? So Target saw this, and the folks at this company didn't understand that the appeal for Canadians was there were plenty of products, the prices were right, the messaging was fun. It felt like a special thing that they could do, go to Target. And then Target came to Canada, and Target decided to saturate the market with Targets. The problem is that our habits are different. We have a drugstore, we have a grocery store, we have specific brands we trust. Our habits are different. So they expected us to adopt Target the way Americans would, which was not going to work. But on top of this, they decided the name alone was enough and that having a proper supply chain, not necessary. So you would walk into Target and you would have empty shelves everywhere and prices were exorbitant. And that brand goodwill did not carry them through. It was not enough.
So that sounds like a right disaster.
I highly recommend anyone Google this disaster if you want to feel good about what you're doing, because this is a lesson in what not to do.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect it from such a big company. You'd expect, bigger companies have more budget. They'd actually just do some research in Canada before they actually jump in, but obviously not.
And you wouldn't expect this from Canada if you're in marketing, aka you think that Canadians are really nice folks, eh? And that they are going to just roll with it. No, we have our own habits. We're really attached to them. For example, you may not have heard of Tim's, but Tim Hortons is the equivalent, I guess, to a watered down, very, very nostalgic Starbucks. The coffee is not good. Nothing is really good there, period. But we are attached to it. We want to talk about Tim's, and we want to talk about donut holes, because the Timbits are the donut holes. And we really, if you have colleagues, you always bring a box of Timbits at the office when you want to please everyone. So if Starbucks comes in and tells us that it's going to replace Tim Hortons, no, no, they have to be different. Like you cannot take on this nostalgic giant that is coasting mainly on brand.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I bet some of the big brands sometimes probably think, oh, it's just a little local competitor. We could go in, and they don't realize kind of the attachment that people have to it.
Yes, absolutely. And there's nothing weirder than the Canadian attachment to Zellers. So it's Zeller apostrophe S. If anyone wants to feel this this type of behavior, like irrational devotion to a brand that is long dead, that Canadians keep wanting to bring back, do not hesitate to look into this. Great marketing case. Like it's a great study in how Canadians think. And I'm going to segue on to nobody really enjoys seeing English in a French website and vice versa, not even Google bots. So the case of having two languages in a page, not good, but very often companies don't realize that there are a few mistakes that slip in and that affect our experience. We can tell something went wrong and we are confused as to how to get the proper language for us. So be very weary of this. It's not the only problem. We have some common ones. Search engine bots are having a hard time figuring out the right version. So when I say right version, it's not even the version of your own website, but google.ca, google.fr, google.com, you need to show the right pages to the right location to avoid cannibalization. So for example, L'Oreal, oh, the US website cannibalizes Canada quite a lot. So the Canadian marketing team is having a hard time making headway because the results are confused, because the US team is not implementing the proper tags to say, hey, Canadian English over there. So that's what we mean by show the right pages to the right location. And if the brand is not able to provide the same products or services in all regions, you need to handle this however you choose. I'm just going to leave it there because that would be the topic for another masterclass, but this is important to keep in mind. And if you're not able to fulfill shipping orders across regions, this will impact shopping experience quite a lot. Keep that in mind.
I've got a quick question for you about kind of SEO content and cannibalization. How would you recommend to handle things? So, say you're a big website, you deal with the US, you deal with Canada, and lots of different companies. Do you recommend people, for example, copy, well, not copy, but redo the American copy, stick it on their Canadian website, add the tags and stuff, or that they have to go with a completely different strategy and actually write different content to the US stuff to stop things?
So this is something that comes up quite often for me, and it depends on the client, the resources that you have, who's going to be on the ground doing this, how strong the Canadian market is for you. But it I do not recommend copy pasting to a different zone. So for example, you will tell Google, well, this content in the US is this, and then this content in Canada is this, and it's the same content. Because Google will go, you're not really localizing stuff. You're just copy pasting and hoping that we rank this. This doesn't work. So what is recommended in that case is that you keep the same content, but in the code you tell Google, hey, this applies to Canada, this applies to the US with an hreflang tag. You can have multiple countries. Um, you can have, for example, English dash CA, English dash I don't know, UK, and say, hey, this is for all these countries I'm targeting. Another element is if you do have the means, I I advise you to adapt your content. It will make a big difference because, like I said, we don't necessarily refer to everything the same way, but we're also not interested in the same things. For example, let me just put that one out there because it's very important. We care about cars not rusting. That's a strange one, right?
Okay.
So you would think that to get a rust bucket, it would take years and years and years. For us, 2 winters with salt. That's it. Some brands are just known to not handle Canadian winters well. We care about this.
I can imagine. I mean, I've been with my husband to so many trips to kind of like DIY stores, to taking a look at the things, and it's like used to 0 degrees or something, and you're like, great, it's going to be -10. And I can imagine you guys have it even more extreme.
Oh, for example, boots. Don't tell me you have good winter boots. Tell me you have good winter boots that will keep me dry up until -25, for example. So at least I can call these my rain boots and not my real winter boots. English ads in Google's Canadian French version are also not a good look for us. Like we will very, very often see some companies that in google.ca in French will advertise in English. They just throw money at it. And why does this happen? Well, the first part is maybe you just enjoy wasting money and decided to do this on Google Ads. This does happen. And the second part is we have a weird mix, right? We will use some words. If I tell you in Quebec, je vais à la game de hockey. I am going to the hockey game. The problem is that game and hockey are both English terms. So you see how ads can get tripped up. So you have to be very careful about the messaging you send and make sure that your ads are not, you're not crossing the streams and wasting money on folks that will go, they haven't even made an effort to speak to me in the right language.
Well, that's something that I see so often, is that people either kind of go out with English ads thinking it's enough, or just do a straight translation of the ads, and then it just kind of misses the point completely.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes you look at this and you go, you don't care about me, you only care about my credit card. Well, my credit card will go somewhere else. So we are sometimes very petty. And when we talk about technical fails, you have to keep in mind that Google dominates. So we need specific things that Google is requiring from international SEOs. Here's why you should focus on fixing these technical issues. Well, there's a common geo IP marketing issue. We have a tendency to want to show people the proper language for their location, and we hijack it. So we will decide, hey, if you appear to be in Quebec and your browser appears to be in this language, I am going to automatically take you to that version. And not only is it not enjoyable, but it causes SEO issues because the bot then may not be able to access pages outside of the US. It will keep being redirected to the US content. So this has happened to me on an international scale because one of my clients decided to check a box that would help user experience regarding this. And the entire German portion of the website went off Google, like gone, because the bot kept being served the US content. So it was like, okay, there's no German content. Clearly, I'm not ranking it. And once again, google.ca, google.fr to google.com show the right pages to the right location with hreflang tags. So you are able to tell Google, hey, like that content that you position in French because the company has a French portion of the website, please don't bring that stuff to our doorstep in Canada. We don't need this. It doesn't make sense. We can't even contact your sales rep. Like, don't do that. You are able to signify this. This is one of the most important weapons you have when it comes to international SEO in Canada. And I'd like folks to avoid some redirects. So this is a very common situation for us. If you ever get excited about a product, you click on the result and then you get dropped on the homepage of the website. It's not that necessarily that the product doesn't exist. It's that you decided since this product is maybe from the US, we'll redirect you to the Canadian website because clearly you are a Canadian and you cannot have this product. But you're not telling me. All I know is that you decided, no, you're not getting that product. I don't want you to have that product. I don't care. I want you to start from the homepage. It is incredibly frustrating. Another one is if it's on sale, available at the right price, the right model that you want, it's obviously in the US version and I'm frustrated.
Oh, it's so frustrating when that happens, and it's also so frustrating as well that, say you're on holiday, or say somebody lives in the country and doesn't speak the language, and then the company takes them to that language website and then can't go back. Oh, that must be
Yes.
so well,
Yes.
especially.
That is a topic for a whole different masterclass, but I wrote a detailed article going, for the love of Xenu, please stop all of this, because as an international human being, I travel a lot. I do not speak half of the languages I'm faced with. Like, let me make my choice. I am just going to say this. Technical SEO matters a lot when you're thinking about, internationalization. And most folks don't realize this because most folks are focused on keywords. But the focus on keywords, it's not always good. So most foreign companies will fail because they use the wrong keywords. And this is something that will probably come up in many, many, many discussions relating to international SEO. So what I'd like to bring about is not the usual, oh, okay, you use the wrong keywords, you have to do your research. Here's what it feels like from the ground. We can tell when Anglophone brands are translating their content into French. It sounds like Angrish. Like it's just, I mean, technically it would be Frangrish, but it's genuinely just bad. Something's wrong. It's linguistically kind of like an uncanny valley feeling. It feels like a robot is trying to masquerade as, a proper human, but in French.
Oh
So,
no.
oh, it's really, really bad. Sometimes, like, depending on how it's done, it can also be so spectacularly bad that we stop and laugh and we go, you know what? At least thanks for the chuckle. We can also tell which marketing director comes from France and which one comes from Quebec just by walking down the street. Because during a sale period, it will say two different things. We have seen this in big, big avenues where we have fun with friends and we point out which one is French and which one is from Quebec. 'Cause if it says, come and enjoy the sales, that is French from France. If they are saying, hey, the sales, so not sales plural, but the sale, like just one, it's going to be Quebec French. The little things really truly matter.
It's so tiny, but it just makes such a big difference. Makes you feel cared about.
And I'm just wondering which employee failed to tell the marketing manager, hey, don't do that. So oftentimes we either think that the entire team is French and doesn't care, or that there is one lone person somewhere that approved this and has no clue what's going on. And I have to tell you the story. It's a famous one. Like it's almost an urban myth at this point, despite the fact that it's true, because it's so bad, you're going to shake your head. Back in the day, Google used to say, if you need a company to help you with your Google ads, Google is it. You can hire Google to do your ads. But what they would do is outsource to partners. So they have gotten better and will outsource to partners in the network that are located in the country. But back in the day, they outsourced a big multi-million campaign to a French agency, and they started advertising cars, so big ticket items. And this is the thing. Automobile, voiture, char, they mean all the same thing, but to different people. My first job, I have the VP of sales come to me and tell me that his chariot, he had a hard time parking his chariot. I'm looking at him and I'm laughing. I am laughing at this point. I'm like, is your SUV that big that you call it the chariot? And he looked at me like I had grown like two other heads and was like, oh, oh, in your country you call that a car. Okay, well, here it's called a chariot. Yes, char
Wow.
means chariot. Yes, it's an old school term. So for us, when we are, francophones from France and we hear char, we will either think of a chariot or a tank. The last time we used that word was World War II, basically. And we didn't even have the good ones. So our experience with chariots, they're very limited. But imagine they spent millions of dollars trying to advertise secondhand cars to people who were looking for chariots because they didn't know the difference. Yes. And then, yes, this became famous because even everyone locally seeing these ads were like, who are you talking to? This, none of us are looking for this. So please, if you don't want to turn money into an urban myth, don't do that. Actually, it's not even a myth. It's true. It really genuinely happened. I will protect the company's name and the agency's name, but it did happen. So the end game here is that you don't want to be that company. You don't want to use a word that no one in the area would use to look for your product just because you decided to work with a company that is not locally present. You need to embrace local linguistic diversity. So you can use Google Trends to check how spellings evolve because I love this, like the Valentine's Day keyword. People have 3 to 4 different ways of spelling it, and depending on the year, one of them wins out. It's
Oh,
it's it's
wow.
been fascinating. And it's something that I use quite often to figure out, okay, how are people referring to these things? Because that can make a huge difference in your marketing efforts. And there's even a Quebec filter, a specific Quebec filter. So, for example, you could check out, hey, we know that with the law, you're not supposed to use English all over, but we also know that a lot of people will Google for Black Friday deals, and that the French equivalent is Vendredi fou. And even if we're trying to make Vendredi fou a thing, most people will still Google for Black Friday in Quebec. So you always have to compose, and sometimes the right way to do it if you are stuck is you will use a proper term, but you will always say commonly referred to as Black Friday because you need to have that word in there.
Mhm.
So I highly recommend you use the Quebec filter to see things. And like I said, Quebecers are not the only ones who speak French in Canada, so be aware of that. Let's talk about the sneaky reasons why translating your English strategy doesn't work. And when I say translating, I genuinely mean like in French, but also thinking that, you can skate on by with American English or, British English. Very often, folks will Google English terms in Quebec because many of them are part of our common spoken vernacular. We have the Franglish words like game de hockey, which is a hockey game. And I love it because most of my peers will come up to me and say, "Oh, French people, you use too much English when you speak." And I'm like, "You just told me that you were going to park your chariot to go to a game of hockey." And I'm like, "There's like 3 or 4 words in English here, but you're attacking me for saying email? This is not going to fly." And we rely on local acronyms, slang, and linguistic shortcuts a lot. So we spoke about the loony, we spoke about the toonie, we spoke about Tim's. That matters to us. But there's more specific things. So in my day to day, and I know this is also used in Toronto, in other cities. Each city has its own slang. But if I'm talking to you about MTL, it means Montréal. If I'm talking to you about Yule, it's also Montréal, but I'm using this, it's the airport code. Some folks will use it in specific spots, like tourism, you will use that. And then Oma is kind of like Soho in New York. Like we know it's Hochelaga Maisonneuve. Like it's put together. We have little things like this. And once you start dropping these little hints, we get you. We know that you understand our local reality. So I highly recommend you check this out because there's search volume for these words. They will pop up. You should investigate something if it looks weird because there's probably a reason why it's there.
I love that.
We
Investigate something that looks weird and different. I think
Yes, yes,
people don't do that. They get scared. They run away. They're like, no, doesn't look right.
there's a reason. There's always a reason in Canada why these words are there. And we care about certain things that other folks don't care about. So we discussed this a bit, but let me expand. Will I pay duties if I buy from you? You should have this piece of content somewhere. I don't want to have to Google this, go on a Reddit thread, scroll down, find the link to your company's duty page. That's not okay. Shout out to a few e-commerce brands that I ended up not buying from because it didn't give this information. Can this withstand extreme temperatures? So I know we spoke about the winter, but in Montreal, often it will go up to 40 or 42 degrees in the summer. It's unbearable. If you are sending me something that will melt in the post, I'm not ordering it. And do you even deliver where I am? That's not always the case. You have to let us know. We have to talk about holidays. The 4th or the 14th of July do not matter to us. This is not our Independence Days. We don't care about Bastille Day. Like, it's not happening here. And The 4th of July, maybe we want the barbecue, maybe vaguely the Super Bowl, but it's not a big celebration for us. However, we do love Boxing Day. Thanksgiving, though, it's at a different day. And for example, in Quebec, it's called Action de Grâce. So you have to keep these things in mind because if you want to have collective goodwill and have great unifying emotions, like big brands really like these campaigns that make you feel good, don't get started with Thanksgiving. It's a whole different ballgame. We also have federal holidays, which everyone gets. You should get on that and figure out which federal holidays are good for you or which ones you should avoid. And provincial holidays, which depend on each territory. So each province gets their own days. Figure out why, because this is usually emotional or historical to us. And we have certain behaviors around those times. That was quite a lot to go through, huh? So
There we go. I think you've given us an absolutely massive insight into the world of Canadian SEO.
I have one bonus nugget of information. Quebec is known as the province that has the strictest laws for a lot of things. So if you want to do specific things in Quebec, for example, giveaways, you may have to have a contest, legally speaking, when you wouldn't necessarily have a contest in the legal sense. You could say, hey, just enter your name or sign up on social media and you are entered into the contest. In Quebec, they ask you to actually fill out something, some type of homework to show that you worked for it. So very often you will have some type of captcha saying 2 + 2 = and you have to put in 4 and then you're signed up. It's incredibly strange. So if you want to do something fun across Canada, check with the cannery in a coal mine to know if it will work. Quebec has the strictest laws regarding marketing.
There we go. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was really, really great.
I hope that I have inspired you to level up your Canadian efforts and see you around the web.